Hi guys, it's Phil
And Liam
from Die Hard on a Black, and we're excited to talk to you about a brand new podcast we're launching called 48 Hours of Buddy Movies.
That's right, folks. 48-hour-long
approximately
episodes exploring 48 different buddy movies, beginning with the original classic that started it all, Walter Hill's 1982 masterpiece, 48 Hours, starring Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy.
And just like Die Hard on a Blank, our new show will explore the influence of 48 Hours on the action genre, one buddy movie at a time.
We'll be covering iconic franchises such as the Beverly Hills Cop movies, the Stakeout movies, the Bad Boys movies, classics of the genre like Running Scared,
Hyams Hive Rise Up,
Midnight Run, Red Heat, Tango and Cash, The Hard Way,
plus tough thrillers such as To Live and Die in LA, Black Rain, Point Break, Training Day, and The Way of the Gun.
As well as a few wild cards that you might not expect, such as RoboCop, Alien Nation, and, of course, Phil's favorite,
Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man.
So if you're a fan of two buddies talking buddy movies,
then 48 Hours of Buddy Movies is for you.
Visit patreon.com/48 Hours of Buddy Movies to subscribe for the price of 1 cup of coffee a month.
See you in the squad car.
Or walking to the squad car, mildly irritated that we've been paired off.
Wherever. That's patreon.com/48 Hours of Buddy Movies to subscribe. Welcome to Die Hard on a Black, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Philip Gawthorne, and with me as always is Liam Billingham, and today's film is Panic Room.
It's Die Hard in a townstone. Now, I say townstone because at the beginning of the movie, the world's most uptight realtor refers to it as a combo between a townhouse and a brownstone. But really, this is Die Hard in a brownstone.
In a brownstone, officially. And to break down the door of this movie, we have a special guest. Liam, would you like to introduce him?
He's wearing a face mask. I've never met him before. He seems a little sketchy. No,
Tell us all about our guest.
It is my old friend and one of my first podcast buddies and an IRL friend, Shahir Daud. Shahir, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, guys. And thanks for, humoring me, honestly, because we're going to be talking about David Fincher. And Liam, you know very well that this is a topic, once you get me started, I can't stop. I have so many theories. I have so many, I was listening to a commentary of Seven this morning to hear one specific comment that I heard 20 years ago that I wanted to reconfirm just for this conversation. So I'm excited to be here and excited to talk about quite possibly one of my favorite David Fincher movies as well, which in the pantheon of great David Fincher films is kind of wild.
Oh, that is cool, because I'm really excited. I hadn't seen this movie in a while, but, and you're very qualified to do this because you are the host of the now decade-running only podcast about movies. It's the only one that exists. Nobody else has ever done a podcast about movies with your buddy, Matt Kroll. And congratulations on getting 10 years in.
I know it does feel like there was an anniversary, a celebratory anniversary recently where I felt we should have given each other, was it like paper or something like? I'm not entirely sure what we should have given each other, but yes, we
new
have
microphones. That's what you get each other. You buy each other a new mic. I didn't know.
No, it's been great. We hit 10 years running, which is wild. Given that I read some statistic that most podcasts fizzle out within a year. But I think
most podcasts fizzle out within 3 episodes.
Yeah.
So the fact that you're somewhere in the 500s is pretty great.
I wouldn't put it any down to our skill or insight or knowledge of films. I would put it down mostly to we are both persistent, and we will not let go even when society is telling us to do so.
Well, speaking of people who can't let go, let's talk about David Fincher.
Have you done Fincher on the show before?
This is our first Fincher, so it's kind of a watershed moment.
The only Fincher?
I think so. I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? Because it's somewhat of an outlier in his filmography in the sense of not a programmer, but in the sense of I'm just going to do a straight thriller with not, and we'll talk about are there themes in this? Are there some of one of the questions I want to ask you are some of Fincher's uber themes present in the movie? But broadly, it's like I'm just going to make a straight thriller, no frills, kind in terms of its story, but the filmmaking flair will be so exemplary that it's going to be a really elevated experience. So that's kind of like how I think it's an interesting, but it's 100% a Die Hard corollary.
Yeah. It couldn't fit the category of the title of this podcast more succinctly in so much as it's such a in fact, it is like the Nakatomi Towers, except one floor only, or two floors, and much, much, much smaller. In terms of the Fincher thing of it, I think, again, thank you for letting me do this, because I indulge in reading biographies, and Adam Naiman's book is sitting on my shelf right now.
It's great.
It is really
great book. It's great. Yeah, totally.
And you know, I think Fight Club was one of the first DVDs I had, and I, poured over all the commentaries. I have the 7 DVD and all that sort of stuff. The thing that I actually was really interested in, looking back at it now, was like, is in the body of work where Fincher kind of oscillates between, he makes this distinction himself between film and a movie. I'm sure, everyone's had that conversation. He talks about the fact that the fact that Darius Kanji and he kind of split on this particular project was because Kanji wanted to make a film and Fincher wanted to make a movie. I think that's the way he makes that distinction. But if you look at his career as well, he does kind of oscillate that way. Even recently, with a film like The Killer, is sort of much more of the sort of pulpy B. He even calls it itself a B movie, And I think there is an interesting oscillation that happens there. The fascinating thing the reason I wanted to go back to that commentary that I heard 20 years ago that I was thinking about, because I remember listening to the 7 commentary, and in it, there was this thing that he kept mentioning Barry Sonnenfeld's Men in Black. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And the reason he kept mentioning it, I think, and this is going to be me hypothesizing or trying to psychoanalyze David Fincher in a way that is probably not healthy for any human being to do, because if anyone's got the darkest recesses of their mind, it is David Fincher. But I think there is something about Fincher where he really does want a sort of Barry Sonnenfeld style Men in Black success at some point, and he hasn't had it. And the reason he oscillates to films like Panic Room is that this is what he thinks is his version of a Men in Black, as in this is what he thinks a crowd pleaser is. Yeah. And inevitably, he's not quite capable, and I mean that with the utmost respect, of delivering what a film like Men in Black delivers. His films are Hitchcockian in the sort of real traditional sense of the word, which is that at the end of them, there is no sort of like hero walks into the sunset. There is a sort of unease with the world because of what we've just experienced. But I really think that Panic Room is his version of what a blockbuster is supposed to be. And unfortunately, it's never quite panned out for him. Even a film like The Killer was sort of intended to be like quick, pulpy, like something that everyone would digest. And I think, a film like Gone Girl is kind of like that. But I think he's always been searching for that kind of movie and hasn't quite hit it. And I think it's great that he hasn't hit it, because his films are far more interesting than, as much as I love Barry Sonnenfeld and Men in Black, I think this is a far more interesting movie.
It's interesting as well, though, the ending of this movie versus a lot of the other ones it is a bit of an outlier, because it actually ends with kind of good triumphing over evil and a pretty straight, for a Fincher film, a pretty straightforward resolution versus the endings of Alien 3, 7, Fight Club, or Gone Girl.
Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
They're sort of the apocalypses of the mind, They're really brutal. The quote that you reference as well, I have in front of me. Liam, you draw my attention to this. The Fincher quote is there's a big difference between a movie and a film. A movie is made for an audience, and a film is made for both the audience and the filmmakers. I think that The Game is a movie, and I think Fight Club's a film. I think that Fight Club is more than the sum of its parts, whereas Panic Room is the sum of its parts, which I think sets the stage for the conversation that we'll have. So just stick a pin in it for a second, because don't worry, there'll be plenty of real estate for you to dig in on this in our Anatomy of an Action Movie section. But I want to go back and just ask you 2 questions. One is, what's your relationship with this movie? Did you first see it when it first came out? And in addition to that, and you already kind of touched on it, like, where does this rank for you in your favorite Finchers? And what is your favorite Fincher, and where would this be on your kind of list, somewhat concisely?
All right. I think I was pretty embedded in Fincher fandom when this came out in 2002, I believe, and I saw it in a theater, and I absolutely loved it when I saw it in a theater. I just thought, the reason I was embedded with Fincher at this point was that one of my earliest important movie-going memories was seeing Seven, and then having a long conversation with a friend of mine about the ending of Seven afterwards. It was kind of like the first time that we engaged with film as in an analytical way. And I wasn't at film school at that point. I still had inklings of wanting to be a filmmaker. So just seeing what he did with that film kind of really, really got me into it. And then I saw The Game in theater, I saw Fight Club in theater, and then I saw this in theaters. At this point, Fincher always gets my money, no matter what. So where it ranks in his filmography for me is actually pretty high, but everything oscillates, in terms of rankings and what have you. And I, if you've listened to our podcast, I kind of don't put too much stock in like where one film is or whatever. I think Fincher's masterpiece is probably Zodiac. I think that is.
I think he's made several, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
he's become my favorite. Yeah,
yeah, and there's several of his films that I would actually like. Like if someone came up to me and said that Fight Club was their favorite movie of Fincher's, I would say, yeah, sure it is. But and so to make that distinction between film and movie, I think as far as films go, Zodiac is probably his masterpiece. You could probably make an argument for The Social Network. You could make an argument for Fight Club. You could make an argument for Seven. And then as far as movies go, I think there's an interesting thing in that distinction that you made earlier, which is that his movies tend to have more in them than most people's kind of idea of just a film for the audience. And so even in that respect, films like Gone Girl, Panic Room, The Game, I love The Game.
The Game is amazing.
Yeah, really rank highly for me as well. So I've actually not done the exercise of like what are my favorite Fincher movies.
That's okay.
I think I delight, if we were to use a sort of food analogy, I delight in the sort of efficiency of this movie in terms of like delivering me the kind of calories I want at any given time really quickly. And I do think that there is more to it. And, that point that you raised about the ending, I think we can talk about this later. I think there's more to that ending, which reminds me more of Kubrick's The Killing than most things. You remember the ending of The Killing where Sterling Hayden's character walks out onto the tarmac and money and everything that he's been working for kind of flies out the window and the money kind of opens up. I think the ending of Panic Room. I don't know if you guys do spoilers at this point, but
if you introduce it, you're going to do one. But for this film, I think it's fine. People will assume that we're going to spoil the film. Yeah, yeah.
But the ending of Panic Room kind of harkens to that, and I think if you think that there is. If you believe that there is more meaning to the ending, sort of more nihilism or introspection to the ending of Kubrick's The Killing, then I think you can make that same analysis towards Panic Room.
It also reminds, speaking of The Killing and the tradition of heist movies, and one of Die Hard's antecedents, Taken of Pelham 1, 2, 3, right, which has it sort of similarly, like all of the effort. Yeah. All of the and Die Hard itself, all of the effort of the thieves, ultimately, becomes slowly and inevitably undone. So that is really interesting to discuss. But we'll get into that in more detail when we dig into the anatomy stuff. But it's a good table setter. Liam, did you see this one at the theater when it came out?
I didn't, and I'm not sure why. I saw it on home video. I remember renting it probably on DVD, and then I think I probably watched it again in 2009 on a lazy Sunday afternoon, and then rewatched it. It's funny to think because I'm that's just a few years ago, but I probably hadn't actually seen this in about 15 years. I revisited a lot of Fincher during the pandemic, and I've always been a ride or die Zodiac guy. I saw Zodiac in the theater when it came out, and I was the people I went with were that was okay. And I was okay, that's like one of the greatest movies I've ever seen. Like I felt that immediately. Weirdly, the movie that has come up and has percolated over to be my favorite, even more than Zodiac in the past few years, is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I've become like obsessed with that movie. It's become my like not Christmas Eve movie, but I watch that movie Christmas week. Like there's something about it.
The feel-bad movie of the year, right?
Yeah, exactly. The feel-bad movie of the year. Yeah. And I saw that when it came out and actually went to a Q&A that he did and talked about it after with him and Rooney Mara. And I was like, that was okay. And it's like casually snuck up on me because I think that movie has like the ultimate Fincher vibes. And I think Fincher vibes are really interesting. As for my feeling about this movie, it doesn't rank super high in my feelings about him, but I really like it. And in fact, just very briefly, when it ended last night, I was like, this is like one of the most unpleasant movies I've ever seen. Like
the vibes are horrible in this film, I think.
But,
you know,
and then I woke up.
That's not a criticism, it's just a fact. It's an unpleasant experience.
Well, it was kind of a criticism last night for me. I was like, I just feel dirty having watched that movie. But then I woke up in the morning and I was thinking more about the like king obnoxiousness of Jared Leto's performance in this movie, and I was like, you know what? If the movie is chasing grimy vibes, this is like a masterpiece of grimy vibes, which I think is a thing you can say about a lot of Fincher's work, right? So yeah, I like this movie quite a bit, but I definitely don't know if I like enjoy watching it. Let's put it that way.
What I was going to say as well, I think is interesting about Fincher's work is that you intersect with it differently as you age. You know, when I was young, I saw Fight Club when I was at university as a film student, turn of the century. And it was instantly like a top 5 movie for me. And I was obsessed with it. As I've got older, the movie that I have gravitated more towards is Zodiac, which is a more mature film. And it's about more mature characters dealing with the dissatisfaction of things.
Middle age.
Middle age, exactly.
Yeah.
So you kind of intersect with these things differently, but they're all, he's obviously such an incredibly assured and fascinating filmmaker to discuss. But briefly, I also saw this one on video and didn't really return to it until it's actually kind of hard to find, isn't it? Because my copy of it is only a DVD. I don't know that if there's a great edition of it available.
So I did some
DVD,
chasing,
which I own.
The DVD is the Power Bit one. I got it from the library. So I did a little
great edition, but it's like a 3-disco with loads of extras. But
I didn't even get that.
There is
one.
a Blu-ray,
I got the, single disc.
but it's not one that has received the attention of some of his other works.
Well, let's get some fast facts on the board here. This film was directed by the aforementioned David Fincher and written, interestingly, by David Koepp, who we just talked about at length on our Dark Angel episode on our Patreon. I can't remember the chronology, I don't know if that's out yet or might be the next one to come out on our Patreon, 48 Hours of Body Movies, but he's someone that's come up a lot and obviously one of the most accomplished screenwriters of the last
this movie is like
30 years.
Yeah.
He's all over this movie. Like it's crazy how much of a David Koepp script this feels like. I mean, obviously he wrote it.
It stars Jodie Foster, Forrest Whitaker, Dwight Yoakam, Jared Leto, and a young Kristen Stewart. It was released, as we discussed, in 2002, specifically March 29th of 2002. And on a budget of $48 million, it grossed $197.1 million. So a couple of things that strike me about that. One is like that's quite expensive for a relatively contained domestic sort of home invasion thriller. On the other hand, it quadrupled its budget at the box office. So that was clearly a good investment. And I think that package, David Koepp script, Jodie Foster starring, of course, she replaced Nicole Kidman, which we'll talk about. But, big bankable star and, Fincher directing, that's just and something that was conceptually new, like taking the home invasion movie but having this new modern conceit of the panic room was obviously that was something that audiences really connected with in that time. But I want to move on to why we're talking about it in this show in a section that we like to call
Die Hard DNA.
Speaking of David Koepp and Jurassic Park, who of course wrote that
This
movie.
is what we've been leading to. That's why this joke's been here for as long as
we finally got there after 65. We haven't done 500, I'm afraid. We've only done 65.
I don't think there are 500 movies to cover, to be honest. God, I hope not.
So, Die Hard DNA. So we've got, these are the things that I've got, but then please feel free to add or chime in. bad guys take over a blank, up to one person to fight back has broadly been our shorthand for what a Die Hard on a Blank movie is, and this absolutely meets that criteria. In this case, burglars take over a house, and it's up to one woman and her daughter to fight back. And the film is essentially a siege movie confined to a single location, just as you were talking about with Nakatomi. We've also got the hero/heroine being a tough, scrappy New Yorker who is forced to use a number of improvisational weapons and cat and mouse combat tactics in order to protect a loved one who is under threat. The central conflict is a battle of wits and wills between determined adversaries who are largely in separate physical spaces throughout the movie and thus forced to communicate mainly via audio systems. In Die Hard, it's via CB radios. Here, it's the panic room intercom. Both films feature scenes where the main character is forced to walk barefoot across broken glass. In this case, Jodie Foster walks across a shattered mirror. Both films have a very strong sense of claustrophobia. In Die Hard, McClane is often forced into these cramped, uncomfortable spaces, the old TV dinner scene. Here, Jodie Foster's character, Meg Altman, literally has claustrophobia, and hence her problems being magnified as a result of being trapped in the titular panic room. And the other thing I thought was kind of interesting was that both films reference other movies and media. Die Hard references various westerns, Rambo, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Panic Room references Home Alone, Titanic, and the crime fiction of Elmore Leonard. But the best one was the fact that in both films, the determined, ruthless thieves planned to break into a seemingly impregnable vault to steal a significant amount of bearer bonds. So it was
the
like...
bearer bonds moment is like DiCaprio looking at himself in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's like, I still don't know what they are, but they seem pretty valuable.
In the time that you've been doing this podcast, have you ever figured out the economics of bearer bonds and how the actual people trade bearer bonds? Because
I have
in the years that I've
but
watched movies, I've no idea.
It's confounding, yes, because essentially it's like they don't have conventional value. We should at some point get some economist on to explain like why they robbed that armored car.
Oh yeah, that episode will do numbers.
Why they left the cash. Why Neil McCauley and his crew left the cash but only took the bearer bonds. And it's almost like black market. As I understand, it's almost like a black market
to bearer
thing.
bonds, right? Which
yes,
is
there is. They don't have
untraceable.
serial numbers, right? It's part of it. That's part of it too. Yeah, I think you hit all of the big Die Hard DNA points there. I think there is a little bit of parallelism between Alan Rickman, or I should say Hans Gruber's sort of like leftist politics actually being a smokescreen, and Jared Leto's being a robber actually being a smokescreen, that he's an inheritance of the wealth of this. Yeah. Of the, like, there's a little bit of like a twist there where you think one thing
greedy
about the
capitalist.
Well, and he's literally, like in the will, right? So it's kind of like, it's kind of interesting.
And his disdain for the everyman, like he hires essentially two everymen to come and help him with this robbery, and he has a kind of like seething disdain for what it is they do. You're a bus driver, Raoul. Or even that, like the most callous moment right before he gets shot, where he hands Forrest Whitaker, who is an expert in this field and is far more qualified to be in this room, he hands him some money and he says, go out and get loaded. As though he thinks that is what he, like that's the reason he does what he does.
That's an interesting point, that he's sort of an elitist, class elitist, even though he sort of has this sort of like pseudo street look. That he is really interesting to kind of unpack that character. I think it's really interesting. The cornrows, but he's white, and that speaks to a whole complexity of potential cultural appropriation and how he wants to be seen a certain way, but actually he's sort of a spoiled brat. It's interesting that Gruber, with his origins of a sort of the character in the book being this, hardline Marxist, that he's actually kind of a class elitist. We've sort of talked about some of that stuff, but we'll save it for the villain section.
Much more capable than Jared Leto's character in this film.
Certainly, but that makes it interesting. That's one of the things I like about this movie, is that these burglars are a mix of really, really competent and really inept. which feels kind of quite realistic in an interesting way.
I think we'll get into it when we get into what the movie's about. But like the sort of who's good at things and who's bad at things in this movie, I think is a little bit of critique. It's a kind of an interesting thing to get into. And I do think you're right on the nose with the like fast thinking New Yorker quality of Jodie Foster and Kristen Stewart's character being part of this as well.
And they have a sort of toughness to them as well, where they're not like damsels that they're used. There's a sort of hardness that comes with being a New Yorker and dealing with crime and dealing with these kind of difficulties that they also convey that feels somewhat
and just being alert, because it's a city where you have to be alert.
Interestingly, though, they are transplants to the city because they have.
That's true.
They've come in from, I think, Greenwich, Connecticut, where
Greenwich.
they've been living like essentially in larger houses, and so for them, like moving to the city is kind of an act of moving to a metropolis in a way, which is that they're having to now deal with things like calling and ordering for pizza, and like getting phones connected up, and like there's a sort of the movie posits them as entirely capable, and Jodie Foster's character is entirely capable, and her husband is a financial, some sort of finance guy, but he lives in the Upper West Side now, right?
Yes, that's correct. He crosses the park to come see them. But he's a finance guy.
Yeah, and so I think there's something interesting about like that idea that I don't know the actual origin stories, but you sort of get the impression that she was a New Yorker who has lived upstate or in Connecticut for a little bit and now is moving back, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And
I think that's definitely there.
I'm sort of curious how that plays, because there's an interesting thing with the titles as well, where I was reading a thing about in Art of the Title where they were talking about the titles kind of hearkening to West Side Story, and that it's a sort of traverse of New York City till they get to that area.
It goes downtown to uptown, right? And it's like concrete jungle kind of stuff.
Yeah, and there's a sort of I guess between Forest Whitaker and Jodie Foster's character, there's a sort of uptown downtown kind of vibe to it of like who these people are, and Raoul himself is a bus driver from I'm not entirely sure where.
Well, this
idea, giving Staten Island.
This is going to be really interesting to discuss that what you were sort of unpacking here with this idea of like the class analysis, which is also a big aspect of Die Hard. We've talked about how the blue collar characters, Argyle, John McClane, Al Powell, end up being elevated in throughout the course of the story. We're all the quote unquote sort of higher class characters. Ellis, Takagi, people like that end up, and the really arrogant cops who are high ranking, like Dwayne T. Robinson and the FBI agents, all end up being humbled. So the Die Hard very much has class on its mind, and I think Panic Room does as well, at least on the back burner. But we'll dig into this in much more detail when we come back for Anatomy of an Action Movie after this quick break. Hey, do you hate ads?
Us too.
Which is why we took a stand against our corporate overlords and turned them off.
But Phil, when we started this podcast, we became mercenaries, and mercenaries get paid. Now I want my money!
Well, yes, while it turns out that money is still required in this society to be exchanged for goods and services, we only want to align with the right kind of companies. And that, my friends, is where you come in, because we are now actively reviewing sponsorship proposals for Die Hard on a Blank.
Imagine it. Your company could sponsor an entire segment of the show, such as Fast Facts or Die Hard DNA.
Maybe the Die Hard Oscars or the Double Jeopardy Trivia Quiz.
Or perhaps the whole darn show.
Yes, that's right, people. This is your chance to opportunize your message across a curated cross-platform engagement pipeline.
To activate paradigm-shifting thought leadership with boots-on-the-ground vibecraft.
In other words, if we can achieve brand synergy, maybe your company could be a sponsor on this show.
So if you're interested in becoming a sponsor of our highly popular and critically acclaimed podcast, email us at diehardoab@gmail.com and we can start a conversation.
That's diehardoab@gmail.com.
Sponsorship suns
rise up! And we're back with our main section of the show, Anatomy of an Action Movie, where we explore the tenets.
We live in a twilight world
of an action motion picture. This action, I mean, this is this it's more of a thriller, I'd say, more of a thriller with a few action elements. But the first tenet of an Ask Me of an Action Movie is the premise. So I'm just going to tee this up, and then I'm going to cede to our guest, our Fincher expert, to really cook on this. So just bear with me for a few moments while we set the stage. So the premise of Panic Room is as follows. On their first night after moving into a luxurious 4-star New York townstone, recently divorced single mother Meg Altman, Jodie Foster, and her 11-year-old daughter Sarah, Kristen Stewart, are terrorized by a trio of mysterious burglars. When Meg and Sarah become aware of the intruders, they seek refuge in the house's high-tech panic room, only to discover that the thing the thieves want most is inside that very room. And the escalating tension is exacerbated by Meg's claustrophobia and Sarah's medical condition. Hence, this is the ticking clock. Sarah is a diabetic and her life-saving medicine is outside the panic room. Now, my question for you, sir. Is this movie about anything beyond the events of the plot? And secondly to that, probably most interesting, we sort of touched on a couple of things that it might be about: class, money, family, whatnot. But where does this fit in Fincher's wider oeuvre, his thematic obsessions, etc.? And my most pertinent question, I suppose, for this, to kick it over to you, is, does it explore any of his Uber themes?
It's an interesting question, because I think the sort of post-release analysis of this film hearkened it to a sort of statement about both the surveillance society and the instability of our institutions, much like Spike Lee's film Inside Man sort of explored as well. I'm not entirely sure. I think. And obviously this came after 9/11, so the sort of New York of it, the idea of two sort of safe houses being, or a single safe house in this particular film being sieged upon and infiltrated, kind of, there's something in the ether about that certainly leads to that reading. I don't think it's intentionally on Fincher's part trying to do that, as much as I think he thinks this is a really interesting story or an interesting exploration. You mentioned the budget earlier. The $48 million that may not account for the fact that they entirely built that brownstone in Los Angeles and pioneered a lot of techniques to really move around it. The sort of the key governing ideas, the photogrammetry, which he used in Fight Club to some extent, but really goes to town with in this particular film. So is the film about more than what the plot kind of suggested it is? I think ostensibly it gets there, but perhaps not intentionally, like the way Zodiac becomes a film about obsession over a long period of time, or the way that The Curious Case of Benjamin Button becomes about a meditation on life or death. I think in the sort of Fincher body of work, something that he is really interested in is the sort of obsessive mind and the way in which a mind can be pressured over time to kind of explode. But in that regards, I actually think this is more akin to things that David Koepp is interested in as a writer. You only need to look at his recent film Presence with Soderbergh as sort of that sort of feels like a Panic Room esque style, and the scene in Jurassic Park when they're in the kitchen. Kind of feels akin to this as well. And it's really about what are the anxieties of this particular character, and how do we pressurize them within their environment? And that's what Koepp is really good at. In fact,
Carlito's Way as well. Although that was an adaptation of literary material, there's and it's De Palma as well, another sort of Hitchcock, sort of acolyte, as it were. But the suspense and tension in that movie, and the idea of a guy being put into a pressure cooker. Yeah. Koepp is so good at that. And Black Bag as well, a pressure cooker movie.
He wrote one of my favorite journalism movies, which if you ever listen to our podcast, I will scream from the rooftops about and try to convince everyone that they need to see it, which is Ron Howard's movie, The Paper, which Koepp, I think it's Koepp's first
It's a great movie.
Saw that at the theater, yeah, it's great.
It's a fantastic movie. And, that in that movie, it's really about, here are the anxieties of one man who is afraid to become a dad. And here is the pressure cooker of him having to deliver this one story within one day, ostensibly about a kid, and negotiate all of that. In, Jurassic Park, it is about paleontologist who is also afraid to becoming a dad, who has to kind of negotiate the terms of
the
like
big theme.
Humanity. And in Panic Room, I think it really is about a claustrophobic woman who has become encased in the house that she has surrounded herself with, having to break out and become free, having to like express herself as her own person by being able to like protect her child. You know, there's this sort of conversation that goes on about like Kristen Stewart's life with her father and with her mother. And, you know, Jodie Foster as a character is trying to rebuild her life at this moment. She is moving into this house. She's using the money. I wanted to like really touch on this as we talked about the sort of economics of this. That house is like well within the 1%ers. You know, like even in 1999, when I think the film is kind of set, or 2000 when the film is set, it was released in 2002, but whenever it came out, that is a $8 to $9, maybe $10 million home in the Upper East Side. You know, like it's ridiculous.
I shudder to think what that house would cost.
Crazy thing is, I would really not like to live there. Looks horrible.
Oh, really? Yeah, I know
you know what I mean.
I'd
rather live in Dolph's apartment in Dark Angel, but in
well,
Houston.
that's Philly vibes. But those buildings, having lived in one as a renter in Park Slope, not quite at that size and scope, like. It's like one of the great things about the movie it gets right is like how you can hear every footstep someone takes in those houses because they're so old and wooden and like airy and like, they feel.
I was curious, you know, like in this sort of rewatch, I was really interested in thinking about what the person who lived there before did, because he kept a small staff. He was some sort of finance person, but he was a shut-in. He was disabled. You know, like I was really interested in like the little details. And obviously, Jared Leto's character was a caretaker for him at some point and is an inheritor of his wealth. So I was like really curious about like that aspect of it. But just circling back to that, I kind of read it more in terms of thematically more of a Koepp story than a Fincher story.
I totally agree.
That's really interesting, yeah.
And I think as far as Koepp goes, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, by the way. There's even a line in Mission Impossible which he wrote, which is, how do you get someone, you know, I think Kittredge says to Ethan Hunt at some point, it was like, how do you get someone out is you apply pressure and watch them run.
Yeah.
You squeeze.
You find something they personally care about and you squeeze. And that's coming soon on Churnicast.
That's Koepp.
And that's Koepp to a T. That is exactly what he does as a writer.
That's
true. He looks at what is the anxiety, what is the central anxiety of this character, and how do I squeeze it? And you know, I think this was not it perhaps was a spec script. He was kind of an established writer at this point, but as I understand it, he had read about the phenomenon of panic rooms and was like, I think that would make an interesting story, you know. And it is like sort of in the same way that Alien is a story about 7 people being picked off by one enemy. It's sort of like a simple setup like that. But I think Koepp is smart enough to like inject it with the claustrophobia of the central character and the fact that she's trying to rebuild her life, and then just really squeezing that, you know, like, we are going to put you in this room and you are going to have to fight your way out. And she's remarkably like adept at doing that in a way that like I think is sort of kind of amusing, but I love watching it, you know?
You know, it's interesting you say that, because one of the Koepp movies I think about the most is Stir of Echoes, which he wrote and directed, which is like, I can't watch that movie. I find that movie, I think it's his directorial debut. I find it so upsetting, but David Koepp has a real interest in what domesticity means and the threat that underlies domesticity. And one of the things that I think this movie is a little bit about, you know, one thing I noticed rewatching it, you know, for the first time in 15 years is that Jodie Foster goes to town on a bottle of red wine in this movie. And like when she wakes up at like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, she has the air of someone who drank 1 or 2 glasses too many in the middle of the night. And she has that, like, she doesn't seem like she feels well. And I bring that up not because I think that's what this movie is about, but I think that what's really interesting is that she's a character who's like had her heart broken by a cheating husband. And every other adult character in this movie that has any prominence feels like a little bit of a threat to her daughter. The real estate agent is like yelling at her. The guy showing the apartment locks her in the panic room with him, right? And then of course you have the 3 criminals that are all sort of directly threatening her. And so it feels like it's to some extent about this woman who doesn't feel like she can trust anyone around her. And I think and I don't know if you guys noticed this too, the movie does this really interesting thing with Jodie Foster's physical appearance, which is in the first and last scene. She's wearing these glasses. She's very buttoned up. She looks sort of like she's guarded out in the world. And then when you see her throughout the movie, you kind of remember, and I don't mean this in a glib way, like when Jodie Foster sits up in that light in the middle of the night without her glasses on, you're like, Jodie Foster is like one of the most shockingly beautiful women and I think the movie makes this really clear choice to put her in this like vulnerable state where she doesn't have the jacket on, she doesn't have the glasses on, she almost like downplays the way she looks in the beginning and end of the movie in public, because I think she's like a person terrified of what's going to happen to her now that she's no longer it turns out her financier or finance working husband is like been cheating on her with a much younger, shittier woman, right, is the idea. And now she has to navigate solo motherhood to some extent. And I think that's partially what this movie could be about. And the threat is the domestic life as opposed to they're coming into her home. She's not going out into the world. This movie takes place in her new home, and it's the first night of her new home. So it's like, it's just an interesting, it feels like a recurrent theme of Koepp's that's also true in Jurassic Park, and the idea of Alan Grant settling down, or in Mission Impossible. One of the great things about Mission Impossible is basically Voight being like, you cucked me, right? Like there's a real sort of like, that seems to be like a pet interest of his, that the lives we lead at home. I mean, Black Book is about exactly this. Our professional lives or real lives melding
invaded with danger.
Yeah, exactly.
That can be as small as, a trio of burglars, or as big as a T-Rex or raptors, or essentially some sort of normalcy.
That's why he works so well with Steven Spielberg, because they're interested in similar questions about domesticity.
Clearly that's a great point and a great distinction. And as a screenwriter, it's something that I appreciate, that we're sort of highlighting what Koepp's recurring obsessions are throughout his career. But I do want to go back to the Fincher thing for a second, because I think it's worth us actually, you sort of touched on this, but maybe it's actually worth us trying to wrestle with this idea. You mentioned the idea of a psychological obsession and how that can explode. But what actually are Fincher's Uber themes? And then we can kind of maybe discern from that, are any of them present in this film, even if they just press in the corners of what's fundamentally more of a David Koepp authored piece?
I think as a filmmaker, his themes come out in this movie, not so much through the characters, but the actual production of this film. So a recurring theme in Fincher's work is the precision of the obsessive. So, if you look at the beginning of the film, The Killer, it is really about like how can I practice so much that when it comes time to execute, I will execute perfectly. And there's a sort of nihilism that he has to that, which is that no matter how much you practice, you will eventually fuck up at some point and something will go wrong.
Exactly.
But I think in the actual way that the film is executed, now sort of the famous stories about the actual production of this film was that it is a deeply unpleasant film for everyone involved who worked on it. In so much as like his obsessive traits, we've all heard the stories of like the opening scene of The Social Network as well, where they did like 100 takes or something like that for that sort of dialogue scene, and how he likes to like over prepare. This movie, unlike Fight Club or The Game or Seven, which all preceded it, was like an exercise in Fincher's sort of obsessiveness coming to the fray in terms of like, how do I produce this film in a way that is uniquely mine? And the way he did that was pre-visualize the entire film framed, beginning frame to end frame. And I think that, like one of the things is that Kanji left because of that. Darius Kanji, who was the cinematographer, who was taken over by Conrad Hall, who was the camera operator at that point. So, and that's how you get, I think where Fincher's obsessiveness comes into play is things like The Big Shot, like they talk about what The Big Shot in this movie is, which is where we do a sort of traverse of the entire house. We lay out the pieces of everything. And then we do sort of like somewhat goofy things like, the camera sort of jumps into the keyhole as it turns. And then there's a sequence. I actually find all of that stuff pretty great, to be honest with you. I kind of like quite like it in terms of like, Fincher is just flexing a muscle here that very few people could flex at that point. There's one scene that I find a little goofy, which is when for some reason he decides to do that sort of photogrammetry trick inside a light bulb or inside a flashlight. And I was just like, that was the one time I was like, I don't think this is really doing anything for you. But back to your question in terms of Fincher's films are about obsessives and the hyper precision with which they can execute their ideas. And I think this film, in a way, is more about that in the execution than it is about thematically. Like, I don't feel like any of the characters are really working in that zone. And like one of the things about auteur theory that we should just sort of like, posit here as well is that every film doesn't, because we identify a sort of tenet of a filmmaker, every film doesn't need to follow that exactly. And filmmakers are prone to like reject ideas that are consistent about themselves and, try things at times that they feel are outside of their wheelhouse. So I watch this as, and as much as I can kind of psychoanalyze this, is that I think this is Fincher working as a filmmaker through the material as opposed to through the characters. Yeah. Like how does he execute this? And how does he do like essentially a domestic thriller, which is much smaller in scale than the previous films that he's done on this, in a way that is interesting and unique to him, I mean, there are other films like this, like Flight Plan, which came out in a similar time.
Yeah, and we had that on the list. Although I think ultimately, I don't think we're going to do it, even though it's a really solid film. But what you remind me of here, and what you bring up about auteur theory, is really interesting because this film reminds me. And what you're saying kind of reminds me a little bit of David Cronenberg's A History of Violence, which we're considering doing. Yeah, which I think is a similar example of an auteur, clearly an auteur, doing a film that is pretty different, that's much more narratively simple, in that it's not science fiction, it's not horror, it's based on a graphic novel. It's a relatively simple revenge story, and it deals with similar ideas. The American nuclear family, or in some regard, broken and as dysfunctional as they are threatened by forces of evil. Broadly, there's a big comparison there, right? But in that film, Cronenberg's auteurist obsessions inevitably rear their head, and it gets kind of pervy, and the violence is beyond the pale, and it gets kinky, and and all of that. So, but it's interesting. I that's why I just wondered, like, are there any of those Uber themes in there? And I think you're right though about what you're saying, that it's actually, it almost feels more like an intellectual exercise for Fincher than like, I'm really interested in exploring like the pervert. For example, the famous quote that Fincher has said, people are perverts. What was the exact quote in the context of it?
He said, I think all people are perverts, they just don't admit it, or something like that. Right. At the heart of everything, everyone's a pervert. A History of Violence is a really good example with Cronenberg. The other one I would think about is Hitchcock's Rope, which is a film that's sort of really driven by a technical exercise. The single take throughout the entire film, sort of in my mind parallels Fincher's obsession with the big shot here. But as a screenwriter, one of the things that I sort of think about a lot is whether you like it or not, every film you make is essentially about you. And whether you want it to be or not, like if the things that interest you will bubble up to the surface in some way. And I think Fincher is interested in that sort of paranoia and that fear of domesticity. You mentioned very early on that the ending is sort of like a very straightforward down the line, and good prevails over evil. I think there's an unsettling quality to the ending that I think is very Fincher-esque, even though it may have come from the script from Koepp. But it is like, yes, we've overcome this thing, but the world is not as stable as it once was. And I think that's still a quality to him that's really interesting. And a movie that really, I think, is a good example of sort of where that conflict of Fincher's worldviews versus the material he's dealing with, because he's not a screenwriter himself, comes to a head, is The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. I really feel like Benjamin Button was a film that feels like it should have been directed by Tim Burton, but it's directed by Fincher, and as such, it kind of feels a little more unsettling than it should be. You know, like there's a sort of a fairy tale quality to that film that I think if a filmmaker like Burton came onto it, you know, like he did with Big Fish, and sort of gave it that sort of romanticism and sort of beauty to it, it would be like, what a wonderful, whimsical story, you know, that's playful about life and death. But it's actually kind of uncomfortable. You know, when you get to the end of it, it's like, I don't know about this. This is, you know, like, I don't know if Brad Pitt, you
That's
know,
where
Brad
he
Pitt
operates,
baby
though,
should
isn't
be.
it? The discomfort.
Yeah.
And this is such a, it's telling me.
Uncomfortable movie, yeah.
It's uncomfortable to watch. This is why I sort of don't find it particularly rewatchable, because it's like a headspace and a vibe that I don't enjoy being in. And what you're saying as well, the other thing that does occur to me, though, from this conversation about the wider things, and then we'll move on to our heroine section, but, you know, I remember watching Gone Girl at the theatre, and and how it begun was the way it was like, you know, the old Hitchcock quote of like, shoot your sex scenes like murders and shoot your murders like sex scenes. The way he was shooting typical normalcy of the domestic, nice SUV, nice suburban cul-de-sac. He shot it in a way that was like terrifying and horrible and unsettling. Yeah. It's like, this is hell. This is prison. You know, I think I don't know what his personal life is like, but he seems to have a real suspicion and discomfort with the idea of the 2.4 children, suburbanite, like, this is the path you're supposed to follow.
I think one of the, and Liam, I saw that you wanted to jump in there, and I was like, I really wanted to jump in on this.
Yeah, go for it.
Because the other thing that I obsess about in terms of Fincher's work as well is like, I can't remember the name of the studio that he ran, Revolution or... propaganda films. So, you know, his obsession with music video, you know, his kind of early pioneering work in music videos, and his ability to basically sell products to people while really kind of just in some way underlining a cynicism that he has about those particular products.
Yes.
And in this film, the way that they shoot a Sony cell phone, a Nokia cell phone, is like, that has got all the polish of a commercial, but there's something deeply unsettling about the way that is revealed to us. And it's like, I think that his, you know, he comes from a world of advertising, but I think he is a sort of, deeply, and in a great way, by the way, I love this quality, is deeply cynical about the things that he sells. Like, his Gap commercials are like oddly unsettling, and you know, the music video that he did for Jay-Z and Justin Timberlake is like this sort of like, you know, it's called Suit and Tie, is sort of meant to be sort of sexy and cool, but at the same time, it's like there's something off-putting about the whole thing. And I think that's that sort of like the thing I was talking about screenwriting before, which is that like, whether you want it to be or not, it becomes about you. And I think the way that he tends to put things together tends to sort of view the world through a slightly cynical lens, and a slightly perverse lens, which I love. Like, again, that Nokia cell phone, like, there's an entire plot point about it, but if you just watch how beautifully that cell phone is shot, but it just feels like, if I was a creative director for Nokia, I would be like, sort of like, I don't know about this, man. Yeah. Like, I don't know if this is what I wanted. Like, it's beautiful, but I'm kind of
unease,
weirded out by it. Yeah.
Perennial unease seems to be the space in which he operates. Liam, do you have something to add before we move on to the heroine
very quickly
section?
I think it's worth adding that I think David Fincher has a very, very black sense of humor. And I think we should, in addition to, like, I think that, you know, with Gone Girl, it's like the domestic is terrifying, but that's also part of the joke.
Yeah.
And there's this quote that he, you know, it's on his Wikipedia, where he talks about how, like, he saw Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and only learned later that, like, and literally he was like, I was so excited when I found out that there were hours between each one of these shots, and that it was like the circus behind the scene. And I think he's just obsessed with that as he is with the illusion. Like, he's interested in the work that goes into the illusion of filmmaking. You know, there's that famous story about how he, first of all, I think some of that unease comes from the fact that he was very aware of the Zodiac when it was happening. That's a very personal movie to him, and like that move, like, I think the sort of like the idea that there was someone out there killing teenagers in the suburban Northern California really hit him. But I think the other thing that I think, there's that crazy story about how he made Gyllenhaal do 500 takes of picking up like a pen in Zodiac, and they got to the 500th take, and he was like, okay, great, delete the 499 ones before it. That's the take. And Gyllenhaal had to walk out of the room because Gyllenhaal was like, I'm going to fucking lose it. I just did 500, and you're going to just get rid of all of them. And like, I think I'm not accusing Fincher of this at all, but I think there's a little bit of trollish humor in the guy that like extends both on the way he makes movies. Everyone thinks he's a genius, but also in the kinds of things he delivers. And I think there's this great pull between him and making blockbusters and high art. He's been attached to so many blockbusters, World War Z 2, Rendezvous with Rama, like these big, I would kill for him to do a sequel to World War Z, but I don't know if he has it in him because I ultimately feel like he kind of views a lot of this stuff, even though he's a brilliant maker and a filmmaker and an artist, like I think he kind of views everything as like a little bit of a sick joke. Like there's a little bit of a sick joke in everything.
And that goes back to your point about the Men in Black thing and how it ultimately, like, even if there was a that World War Z sequel didn't happen, it would feel very strange as that he would do a sequel to a kind of a franchise.
He's got one coming out. He's working on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood sequel.
That's right.
With,
the sequel to that, the TV show.
Is it a TV show? I thought
it is
a
TV
movie,
series.
But
I think it's a TV show, but Once Upon a Time in Hollywood 2 with Brad Pitt as Cliff Booth, right? That's like his next big project.
And, like as you said, he was attached to World War Z, he was attached to Spider-Man, he was attached to Mission Impossible 3 at some point.
Right, I remember that, yeah.
He's attached to...
Famously, his Mission Impossible movie opened with Ethan Hunt pulling someone's heart out.
Oh my gosh.
Sure.
Right? So like
why not?
Paramount were like, whoa, okay.
But the other thing I actually love about Fincher, because I direct on set, and the thing that very few directors actually ever talk about, and Fincher always talks about, the quote that I remember, and I always use this on set, is like, every day is a rat fuck on set. He's like, like every day fucking sucks when you're on set. Like every day is a compromise of your vision and nothing goes to plan. And basically you'll get to like 20 to 30% of what you actually wanted that you could see in your head. And very few people actually say that out loud, and that's why there's all these great quotes from him as well, which is another famous one that always does the rounds is like, so you're telling me that you've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to bring an actor to set, you've, staged all of this, you've put everyone up in hotels, you've caught, millions of dollars of camera, and you just want to get them out as quickly as possible. And he's like, well, no, everything sucks, and it's hard work to do this, so I'm going to make sure I get exactly what I want. And I think, in a way, this movie is a sort of flex in that direction, which is that I have pre-visualized every inch of this film to the extent that what you see in the pre-visualization is essentially what we deliver. And, every moment is something that I am in control of. And I think it works, for me, take the wheels, David Fincher. I'm on board for that.
Doesn't that also leave, isn't the counter argument to that doesn't that leave like no space for spontaneity, no space for humanity?
I think
acting, performance and so forth, or unexpected choice. It's like if it's all so, that must feel quite constraining in some ways.
One thing he sort of says about that is, and I do agree to this as well, and I try to approach my work in this way, is that the more rehearsed you are to the point where it is absolutely worked out in advance allows you the space to be spontaneous on set. Because now you've worked out how everything is going to work and how it's going to work to, like how everything is going to connect together because you're only shooting a piece at a time. That gives you room to play within that. And I think, there are moments in this where Foster and particularly Kristen Stewart, get to sort of have these like little interchanges that are very like, Mom, and I think that comes out of the fact that the movie is so well prepared. Everyone works differently, but I think an accusation that is that has been made towards Fincher is that his films can feel cold and heartless and cynical.
Yes. I think that can be a side effect.
Fincher it's something that I believe in, which is that the more buttoned up you are on set, the more space you have to play within that. And I think there are moments like that in this movie between Kristen Stewart and Jodie Foster where they really, they have that sort of mother-daughter relationship at the burgeoning of that age where it's like everything is a little bit cringe. The moment I love in this movie is when they're doing the intercom thing and she's like, say fuck. And so like she inserts the word fuck at the most inappropriate moment.
Fuck!
I think there's, to me, that's the actual spontaneity or the sort of life of the movie is those little pieces. But yeah, I think he certainly knows the tenor of how to make a movie like this, where you have to button up every detail in terms of like the difficult things, and then give your actors some room to play outside of that.
But I think there is the potential side effect if everything is so rigorously designed or done or whatever that it's almost such a technical exercise that his films can leave you feeling cold and that they lack a warm beating human heart. And some of the film that works amazingly. That's the whole point. Alien 3, 7, even Fight Club to some extent. These are all pretty cynical and potentially nihilistic movies. Right. And you have to be in the right mood to watch them. You certainly don't want to be hungover. You certainly don't want to be feeling down. Because they're kind of unforgiving. But that's just, people know kind of that's what to expect, and it's like a weird form of like sadomasochism to watch a Fincher movie.
I mean, that was the criticism of Panic Room, right? Was that it was too cold, too calculating, too precise. And I think he even responded to that.
Yeah. Totally.
What was the next film after this? Was Zodiac? Was that right? Or
2002?
I think he had one in between. I have it up right here. Let me look at his filmography very quickly. Yeah, Panic Room. 5 years later, he makes Zodiac. So
5 years,
and he makes Zodiac and Benjamin Button at the same time.
Yeah, they're happening at the same time.
And just I'm not a huge fan of Benjamin Button. I just think it's a curious artifact. And Benjamin Button to me is like the response movie to Panic Room, which is that it is sort of like a fairy tale movie, but as done by David Fincher. And it sometimes works. It sometimes was weird. It sometimes doesn't work, but I think Benjamin Button is the response to that sort of not accusation, but that sort of like criticism of like your film's feeling
it's his fairy tale.
Too clinical. Yeah, it's his fairy tale. It's his Tim Burton movie.
Totally.
Let's talk about the heroine. We touched on it with, you mentioned a bit about what makes Jodie Foster interesting or different in this movie. Jodie Foster as Meg Altman, how do we feel about this character, this performance, as a kind of an action heroine? I think it's kind of interesting to frame it maybe that way. What do you guys think about this? Her character. I mean, she's an iconic actor.
The question I would ask, really, that I thought about when I was watching it is, how would we feel about Nicole Kidman in this role?
I think this is the better casting. I love Nicole Kidman. Don't get me wrong, but like I think. Jodie Foster is very surprising in every role that she takes on. I think of her as like a very steadfast, but like Nicole Kidman has this rep, where she feels as though like it's going to be less hard for her to rise to the challenge. She's already made The Peacemaker at this point. She'd made some action movies. I think to me, Jodie Foster is like great because she's sort of like, she reminds me of Bruce Willis in that she's great to watch think. I love watching Jodie Foster think and
she reads very smart.
Yeah, she reads really
incredibly smart.
And she reads like in this part particular a little damaged and like trying to figure it out on her feet. And the movie with juxtaposed against Fincher's like insane, previs style, having someone who looks like they're improvising their way through a situation is really, really well done. I think she's great. I think it's a great performance.
Yeah, I think the movie has a couple of like bravura set pieces as well, and you need someone at the center of those set pieces who can sell you the ridiculousness of them as believable. Like the sequence where she decides to light the gas on fire, I think is an all-timer.
It's amazing.
Absolutely, I love that.
I think that sequence is incredible. I also think the slow motion running sequence is fantastic as well.
It shouldn't work, but it does, right? That kind of thing is so cheesy in movies, but he really pulls it off.
And I think her at the center of it is what anchors us to that, where we're like, yeah, this is wild, but I also believe that this character, as played by Jodie Foster, would do these things and is capable of pulling it off.
I agree.
I would say her most iconic role is Clarice Starling, right? In Silence of the Lambs, despite having been in the business forever and even as a child actor, like her opposite number in this film, Kristen Stewart.
We're not going with Nell for that? We're not going
sorry?
with Nell
Not
for
Nell.
her most iconic role.
But why I mentioned Clarice Starling is it's a great example of her strengths as an actor, which is she's simultaneously capable of being incredibly vulnerable, and incredibly kind of like badass and capable, capable in a crisis. Those two things kind of coexist. She doesn't lose her humanity. She doesn't come across as like, I think there's a spate now of action heroines with heavily choreographed fight scenes in shitty spy movies where they all just seem like, hey, this is just me being cool, man. It's like a fucking huge eye roll.
She
And this
made
actually
one of
feels like
those
a
with the
human
Brave
being.
one. She made the Brave one, which is a precursor to that kind of stuff, which is a pretty good
It's
movie.
like a female Death Wish, right?
Yeah, but it's
Neil
good. I
Jordan.
like that movie.
Yeah. I mean, but I'm talking about like now in the content, in the sea of content slop.
Yeah.
Right.
There's just a lot of like they just feel like, hey, here's a movie star doing some high kicks or
You're right.
whatever.
That's a really good point.
As opposed to this is a human being who isn't an ex-Navy SEAL or whatever. Like it's just a normal person. But Jodie Foster is really good at being human, vulnerable, and super sort of capable and intelligent. And I think those are qualities that an audience really likes in a heroine.
My favorite performance of hers in this film, the favorite moment that I think requires an actor of her caliber, is the police officer at the door. Where she has to give a performance while still kind of like being the character under pressure as we understand it. So it's such a really fine line that she's riding along on that, and you're like, oh, what is she giving him a clue at this point? Like she's really, and to that question you asked about like Fincher's precision giving room for a performer to breathe. I think even within his precision and his sort of pre-planning, there's still like, okay, this is really an actor's moment, and I'm not going to mess this up by, inserting a weird camera trick or, like something in there that's played really stilly.
Yeah.
And it's that's a really sharp, precise moment when she has to like, talk to that police officer. I think it's really, really, and that's why she's great in the movie. I think Kristen Stewart's also really good in this.
She's always great.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Excellent. I want to talk though about, I think while Jodie Foster is always going to be really, really solid, I think the more interesting characters in the film are the three villains.
Yeah.
So why don't we start with Jared Leto as Junior? I'm going to say this, like Jared Leto seems to have a bad rap in the culture, in the discussion. I love Jared Leto. I love this performance. And in fact, this was the first thing I think he caught my eye in, where I was like, wow, this is a very busy performance. It's quite a flashy performance. The film needs it though, because Jodie Foster is very sort of like normal and straight. And Forrest Whitaker is very normal and straight. And Dwight Yoakam is behind a mask for a lot of it. And he's awesome, but doesn't sort of say much. You need someone doing something, because the film is so cold and so clinical that it needs a burst of some kind of histrionics to make it interesting. And I think Jared Leto is an electric performer. I really, really enjoy his work. I think it seems like the tide seemed to turn on him with the Suicide Squad Joker thing, where people were just like, they vehemently rejected that. And it's off the back of Heath Ledger, and there's a lot of like unease about that.
It's also the on-set antics that are really kind of gross with that movie. I think that's part of it too, that rejected it a little bit, right? But like, I think I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and to be fair, I actually really like his performance in this. I think it's a slightly different movie than where everybody else is playing, but as to your point, Phil, that's actually what the movie needs. And like there's a point where he's smoking crack in the movie, I think as well, like or he's smoking some.
Or he's about to
some
smoke
kind
crack.
Yeah, he's about to smoke crack, and it's like that's a real character choice that he's got there. And Leto, full disclosure, I met with him at some point about a project a while back, and I was like, the big thing that I really am bummed about is like, I wanted to ask him about two movies. One was Panic Room, and the other was The Thin Red Line, like just working on those two films. Because I just think he's obviously like a leading man kind of, look at least, but he really plays wiry and weaselly really well. And I think this movie really needs that performance. And I think like to the extent like the wardrobe, the sort of like, and
it needs
and
to get a bit weird, frankly.
And
it's too
Fincher's
straight.
aware of,
know?
I think Fincher's really aware of this, which is like why he beats the shit out of him in Fight Club. You know, it's like why
I
Brad
wanted to
Pitt's
destroy something beautiful.
I wanted to destroy something beautiful, and like Leto knows that, like, yeah, that's where I got to be in this movie. Is I got to get the shit kicked out of me, you know, like because I think Fincher probably gets a kick out of it, and I think the audience is going to really love it when that character gets burnt in the face by the gas pipe.
Yeah, because
you know?
he's so unlikable. It's such an unlikable, obnoxious like for about 20 minutes of the runtime of this movie, I was like, I fucking hate Jared Leto, and I didn't mean it, but I was like literally transposing his, because the performance is so obnoxious that like I was having trouble seeing the difference between the two. But like I woke up this morning kind of like, damn, he really understood the assignment in playing this part of the movie. And it plays
in such great contrast to Forrest Whitaker, who's so steadfast,
soulful,
and like thinking carefully through,
super internal.
And also like is understanding the problems before Leto's character is, and is like, there's a sequence that I watched, you know, over and over again as I was preparing for this, was when they realized that the three people are in the house. Oh, they realized that the two people are locked in the panic room, and he's basically negotiating between Forrest Whitaker and Dwight Yoakam. Can we still do this? And there's a kind of real balletic precision to the way that Fincher frames all of this stuff, which is like, it's hard to describe on an audio podcast, but if there's video of this, is like, the way Fincher does like a camera cut is not quite like anybody else does. And like he will turn exactly at the moment as Leto's head turns. And between him as he turns back, there's this triangle of power that has been set up that Leto's character is trying to like intervene in. And it's so precise and beautiful and also wild and weird and funny. And it's working on all these levels at the same time. And, you know, like, I think it's a really great performance. And then on the other side of this, I think Dwight Yoakam kind of rocks in this movie.
Absolutely.
Like, he's got the sort of the quiet, menacing figure character to play, who's also an idiot.
Like he's a total dummy. It's great. Yeah. It's so smart how dummy is.
Well, stupid people in those situations are frightening.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and I think that's the whole point, right? I think that's why.
In some respects.
Totally.
But there's a really great moment where he and Forrest Whitaker kind of just glance at each other, and I think it comes down to this sort of working class thing, which is that they both understand the plan. You know, like there's a moment where it comes at the hose pipe moment where they're going to stick the pipe into the wall. And those two kind of take over, and they don't say anything to each other because they completely understand what the plan is.
They kind of form an alliance.
Leto has to play catch up.
The dynamics of that relationship is interesting because at a certain point you're like, oh, those two guys like get it better than Leto does, obviously, because he's like posturing as like a thief or like a criminal, right?
I love what Leto says in that, you know, like I was talking about the Men in Black thing, which is that he mentions the Elmo legend, you know, because I've seen that movie too. And I like the immediate thing I was thinking of was Get Shorty, you know, like, Fincher's sort of obsession with Barry Sonnenfeld's like financial success.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Huh.
Yeah, Dwight Yoakam, kind of a revelation. I mean, he'd done really good performances. I guess Sling Blade was probably the one that really kind of turned people's attention. That he was more than the country singer that he'd been was widely known for. And I know there was some interesting quotes around the idea that the character's called Raoul, which you wouldn't assume that Dwight Yoakam would play a character called Raoul, but it makes him weirdly more interesting. There's like a story behind that somehow.
Is there a trivia question about the casting
Unless that's
of
a
this?
fake name.
Is there a trivia question about the casting of this role, or can we talk about it?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Well, I want to see the version of this movie where Maynard James Keenan plays Raoul, because that was who was originally supposed to play this part as the lead singer of Tool. And he couldn't do it because he had other commitments. But Fincher, famously made the Judith video for A Perfect Circle, and they were collaborators. And like, I think Dwight Yoakam is great, but like as a Tool head, I would have like killed to see Maynard James Keenan reveal himself in this movie and like just play a psycho. He's in a few Tenacious D sketches, right? So he's like, there is that, but he's like, he and Fincher have a lot in common. There are these like guys who make quote unquote gravely serious work that if you dig behind the exterior, like Tool's music is all very trollish and they're making fun of themselves, right? And so, but it's all presented without a wink, with like a very serious format. So it'd just be really interesting to see him in this part. But I think Dwight Yoakam is great. And again, I think Forrest Whitaker is just the most soulful fucking guy on camera. Like he's just so
tragic character and
Totally.
increase and sort of becomes not the hero by any stretch, but
he does the right thing.
Has redemption. So he has kind of a cool,
but still gets
cool
fucked.
arc.
No one goes out of their way to save this guy at the end of the movie,
gets away clean.
Very Fincher.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the action. I mean, you mentioned the gas fire, which I agree. It's like that's one of the scenes I really remember. This blue electrical fire or blue gas combination of the two, right? I remember that was such a striking image. That final conflict where it goes super dark, almost horror movie dark with the sledgehammer. But the note that I had here was the camera work is the juice. The set pieces, to your earlier point, it's more about the form itself than the content. But how do you think this fares as an action level?
To be fair, my sort of interest in action movies kind of wildly swings. I tend to look for little details. That's what really attracts me to an action movie, when there's little precise details within it. So Heat is a really great example, the shootout in Heat, because it's filled with so many little character interactions. And so when a set piece is just like people beating each other up, I tend to get a little lost in it.
Sure. Agree.
So I really respond to like the sort of precision of each set piece here, and how nothing... The sort of detail I'm always looking for is like, or the word I'm always looking for is like, does the set piece or does the action set piece feel bespoke? And in this, every set piece feels bespoke. It's like there's no format that kind of does what this movie is trying to do before it, and there's no format that would like apply. Like he doesn't break out a handheld camera as a character runs up the stairs at any point. It's like it's really well choreographed and precise and bespoke for every moment. Like the slow motion sets piece doesn't feel like it comes out of anywhere else, and it feels like perfectly calibrated to what this movie is trying to do at that moment.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great reference point for whether action earns its place and feels like it's in the
and I think all that sort of thing about Fincher being too precise and too cold would be 100% accurate if it didn't work. And the thing is, all of it works.
You're right. That's a really good point.
Yeah. It's a solid. The set pieces, such as they are, especially the fire one, I think are pretty great.
This is maybe a spin out of this, but like I think the last shot of this movie should have been Jodie Foster stare before it cuts to that last scene and looking through the apartment.
It is kind of weird. It's like it should just end and then there's like a epilogue. I feel like I didn't need that.
I often wonder if like I don't know this at all, but I kind of wonder sometimes if the studio is like, we need one more scene, because that feels like a studio note. That feels like the ending of a David Fincher movie. Like it feels like the ending of Seven, right? Like there's just this like sort of,
you end at that high level
with that
of stress.
Music, that fucking incredible score in that
and then
that
there's
moment.
like a come down that you don't really need or want.
I think that was the note in Seven, which is why they added the voiceover at the end of Somerset saying something along the lines of Hemingway once said, the world is a great place and worth saving. I believe in the first part, or I believe in the second part. Something like that, and then cut to black. And I think Fincher wanted the film to end on the gunshot in Seven, from memory.
So jarring.
Yeah,
I'm
because he
nauseous
wanted
thinking about that as the ending of that movie.
That wouldn't work. In my opinion.
And I think he got a note about it, and that's kind of
very Fincher too, right? Like, I mean, like it's like I feel like that's his worst instinct. Maybe is that's how that should end.
There's an interesting thing about the final shot in this, which is that it was reshot. So if you watch the behind the scenes, they did a really elaborate setup for that final shot where they built like this platform in Central Park, so that she was sitting in a way that I think. Someone will have to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think the Twin Towers was behind where they were shooting. So, and he really specifically wanted to calibrate that, but it turned out to be too prescient as the Twin Towers fell recently after the movie. So they reshot that sequence just at a sort of like really basic level in Central Park. But he still added the sort of classic trombone shot to it, where the dolly in with the zoom out, where there's this. It's like the way it's being used in Goodfellas, which is like, okay, the world is continuing, and here is just an ordinary conversation, but something is unsettling about this. And I think, to me, the way that final shot plays is that while they have gotten out of the situation, their perception of security and family and how we will interact and live in the city together as they're looking for a new apartment will be forever changed. And they will not go back to normal. Yeah. You know, like that's the way I kind of read that.
Right. You know, Liam, you made a really good point about, I think the other thing to consider in Fincher's movie is that sort of dark, twisted sense of humor. Just finally on this section, and then we'll have to move on. Was there, just for each of you, was there one moment, line, or, you know, a section of the film where there was a line or a detail that tickles you on the humor aspect? Because this is a sort of perversely funny.
Shahir already said it, but the fuck
way.
moment. Say, get the fuck out of my house. Like, I just think that's a really funny movie. And a great illustration of Foster's very unselfish sense of humor. Like, she allows herself to be the butt of the joke, right? And I think that's really good. I think I jumped on it, but I think the first scene with the realtor and the manager is like the best sort of like Manhattan classist kind of bullshit that you would expect. But yeah, I think those are the two funny moments for me. And I really like how he leans over the staircase and is like, I'd really like to show, you know, it would be really great if I could show the house before I leave, you know, like shit you would, and he doesn't realize who he's talking to and that she has deep pockets. Like that feels very self-aware.
And I think the scene where, you know, like what's great and is a great setup for the movie itself in terms of like her capabilities is when she notices that there's a panic room and he's like, nobody else has, you know, picked up on this at all. I think I think the funniest moments for me are around Leto and Forrest Whitaker kind of trying to negotiate it. I can't pinpoint exactly where this is, but the sense of Whitaker like going, this guy's an idiot and I've gotten in way too far onto this, you know, is a thing that I think is quite amusing. And then, you know, perversely, Leto getting shot in the head, you know, just unceremoniously being removed from the movie, I think is kind of funny.
Yeah, it's the whole thing is kind of like you said. I think everything that Fincher does in some way is like this is like a $48 million sick joke.
Yeah, exactly. You know? And he's not afraid to spend $48 million on a sick joke.
Why not? You know, it's the carnival of the human experience. I think as he sees it. Let's put on our tuxedos and head over to the Die Hard Oscars. And we will start with.
I'm putting on a mask.
Put on your mask and, you know, slip in the back door. The John McClane Yippee-Ki-Yay Award for Best Line. I've got 3 nominees, but feel free to add one if you have one of your own. There's a bit where Sarah, Kristen Stewart's character, when she first sees the panic room, she's like, my room. Definitely my room.
Yeah, that's
which is really good.
Kristen Stewart, man. She's great.
Fantastic in this.
Yeah.
How do you, there was a line of Junior, the Jared Leto character, it's a really great line where he says, how do you live in New York and not have a single Percocet?
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
That was really good. But this was like, this is Koepp's genius. The following masterclass in exposition. Sarah, fuck him. Meg, don't. Sarah, fuck her too. Meg, I agree. But don't. That is writing, that is a diamond.
That scene is amazing because then they cheers and we understand everything.
Exactly.
Yeah,
in 4 lines, you understand the entire
and the body language. Like it is one of those great fusions.
It's also working on the level of like she's drinking Coke. And it's the setup that she is diabetic later on.
That's right.
You know,
Chekhov's soda.
Yeah, so you know, because it comes into play later on. It's really good writing. And then it's not a line, but there's a scene when where Jodie Foster's character is in the bathtub later, and you know, like she's meant to be having a breakdown at that moment, but all it is just a little gasp that she has where she just kind of like purses her lips and cries just a little bit.
Yeah.
I kind of love that. But I don't know if that is the Die Hard Yippee-Ki-Yay moment. I think probably get the fuck out of my house moment is probably it for me.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I just think David Koepp is such a great writer.
Yeah, well,
like I just, you know, and the scene that you outlined, Phil, there, just in terms of like its efficiency.
Yes.
You know, like it's telling so much story in such little words. And it's really powerful. I think he's so good.
That I would nominate. I mean, it's not like one line, but that dialogue exchange for me just as a masterclass in efficient exposition. You know, it's just like a chef's kiss.
Oh, just to follow on from that, she also says, when they do when she calls the dad, and Jodie Foster's Kristen Stewart's character says, "You don't understand. She won't, she won't tell him." Or she won't let him get out. It's building upon that same thing as well, which is like the stepmother or the new girlfriend is a real threat to this.
Who we never meet, but we understand totally what she's about from really clever minimal dialogue.
Just one line,
The Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film. Quite a few nominees and all strong candidates. I've put Kristen Stewart as Sarah, Forrest Whitaker as Burnham, Jared Leto as Junior, and Dwight Yoakam as Raoul.
It's Kristen Stewart, in my opinion. I think she's just great.
I think Forrest. I think Dwight Yoakam steals the movie, but I think the movie is Forrest Whitaker's. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think the movie gives him the most complete arc and the most tragic story, but Yoakam kind of has the most fun, I guess would be the way to describe it, in terms of I get to be the sort of masked stranger in the room.
Mustache twirling a little bit, too. Yeah, totally.
I'm going to say Jared Leto because he's just the most, and the thing I remember the most from even though they're all great, I just remember he's a vivid, like him or loathe him, this is a vivid character and a vivid performance.
I never loathed him more than when he says, "Go out and get loaded" to Forrest Whitaker. I was like, how dare you?
Yeah, that's fucking gross. He's gross. Yeah. Gross. Good. Those are good.
The Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie. My only nominees are the two realtors, Ian Buchanan as Evan Kurlander and Anne Magnuson as Lydia Lynch. Do you recognize her from anything?
Do I recognize Anne Magnuson from a little movie called Clear and Present Danger?
Mr. Lawn, Moira.
Yeah, she's so... Oh, that was good. That was really good. Wow. Anne Magnuson's wonderful. There's a little bit of casting insanity in this movie. Patrick Bacall, I don't think this is a trivia question, is the star of Eric Rohmer's La Collection News, which is one of the great Eric Rohmer movies. And he's
the realtor, right?
No, he's the father. So he's a very famous Belgian French-speaking actor, and I had to look it up after but he's the star of one of the great Eric Rohmer movies. Anyway,
and just in terms of that casting, he's also exactly how I'd imagine. I didn't realize, but as soon as he appears, I'm like, that's the husband. And of course, that's the person that Jodie Foster married and fell in love with and is now fallen out of love with.
Yeah, and interestingly, that character isn't just a complete one-dimensional dick.
No,
he's actually tries to be somewhat heroic in that situation, in a pretty disempowered situation.
Out of him. Yeah.
So I think it's kind of cool that it does something quite realistic and dimensional with that character. But the final Oscar is the best death. There's not a ton of deaths in this movie. There's two pretty memorable ones. One is Junior being shot by Raoul, which unceremoniously, as you mentioned, and the other is Raoul's death, which is a humdinger, shot by Burnham after being hit with a sledgehammer and knocked down the stairs by Meg. Whoa! They don't just kill him.
He becomes the monster of the movie, right? By the end of it, he is unrelenting, and he's climbing up the stairs with broken hands and fingers decapitated.
It's a very horror movie, isn't it?
Yeah. He's the snarling monster of the movie. So it's great when he's Koepp's Velociraptor in this scene.
Yes.
He's just unrelenting, and you will have to destroy him.
Yeah, I think it's his death because it's so powerful. Because
has to be, right?
Yeah, it's terrifying what's about to happen.
And it's cathartic when it happens. When Whitaker blows his head off, you're like, thank God that happened.
Yes. Yeah. You definitely you really need him.
You're cheering a little bit.
Yeah.
Totally. I agree with that.
All right, let's take one last break and then wrap things up with our last section of the show, the Double Jeopardy Trivia Quiz, where the scores can really change. We'll be right back. Hey, do you hate ads?
Us too.
Which is why we took a stand against our corporate overlords and turned them off.
But Phil, when we started this podcast, we became mercenaries, and mercenaries get paid. Now I want my money!
Well, yes, while it turns out that money is still required in this society to be exchanged for goods and services, we only want to align with the right kind of companies. And that, my friends, is where you come in, because we are now actively reviewing sponsorship proposals for Die Hard on a Blank.
Imagine it. Your company could sponsor an entire segment of the show, such as Fast Facts or Die Hard DNA.
Maybe the Die Hard Oscars or the Double Jeopardy Trivia Quiz.
Or perhaps the whole darn show.
Yes, that's right, people. This is your chance to opportunize your message across a curated cross-platform engagement pipeline.
To activate paradigm-shifting thought leadership with boots-on-the-ground vibecraft.
In other words, if we can achieve brand synergy, maybe your company could be a sponsor on this show.
So if you're interested in becoming a sponsor of our highly popular and critically acclaimed podcast, email us at diehardoab@gmail.com and we can start a conversation.
That's diehardoab@gmail.com.
Sponsorship suns
Rise up! And we're back with our final section of the show, the Double Jeopardy Trivia Quiz. The rules are very simple. 3 quiz questions. You get, you can phone a friend, aka you can radio Al Powell for a clue. And you can work together. We encourage collaboration on this show. So here's the first one, guys. Question number 1. Seven screenwriter Andrew Kevin Walker has a brief cameo in the film. Whom does he play?
Liam,
no, please go ahead. I know too, but you take it.
Yeah, it's the sleeping neighbor who closes the blinds.
Is correct. Who Meg and Sarah try and fail to contact using the flashlight. That is the writer of Seven and The Killer.
And 8mm, a movie I love.
Great writer. Question number 2. It's well documented that Nicole Kidman had to be recast in the film, but Kidman still technically appears in the movie. Which character does she play?
The girlfriend. Or the
voice.
Wow,
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Her
It's
voice
the only
appears
other woman
on the telephone as the voice of Stephen Altman's new partner, who Meg calls in the middle of the night and calls a bitch.
Fascinating.
Pretty cool. Fincher touched that. And
Fascinating.
so cool of Nicole to do that.
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
that's
she's great.
Awesome. Okay. Final question for the clean sweep. In which forthcoming Die Hard on a Blank movie does Forrest Whitaker play a desperate NYPD hostage negotiator?
Oh, this I don't know.
Phone booth.
Is correct.
I gotta get that number. He does this like really distinct. I need that number thing.
It's a
that he
Joel
does.
Schumacher joint,
Yeah,
right?
it is. One of the
is
last great
indeed.
ones, I think.
Yeah.
Coming soon. Coming next, I think. Is that
That
right?
sounds right. We'll have
No,
to see.
I think we've got Rain of Fire coming up actually, and then
Okay.
then Phone Booth.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all we got. Thank you so much for lending us your
Shahir, it's great to have
expertise, your
you.
dulcet tones. Just remind everybody where they can find your show and find you on social media and find your work before we let you go.
As mentioned, we are the only podcast about movies, and we will not hear any evidence otherwise. So you can find us on Spotify. That is the only podcast about movies. There's 500 and something episodes with all sorts of interesting topics. We do an episode about music and movies. We do an episode about how to deal with people that are being cancelled, art versus artists, all sorts of stuff in there, as well as the latest releases and whatever takes our interest, basically.
It's a great show.
Thank you very much. Liam, you've been on it a couple of times, right?
Citizen Kane and
Gladiator? Yeah. A lot
Any
of hot takes
helicopters
as
in
well.
those films?
There's a couple helicopters in Citizen Kane.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That's what
I'll
Rosebud
have to
is.
check it out.
It's helicopter.
Gladiator is Die Hard in a Coliseum, of course. And then you can find my work. I run a film production and animation studio called Suvanova, which is SUVANOVA. And you can see all of our work there. But this was a blast. Thanks for having me on, guys. It was either this movie or Crimson Tide I was dying to talk about. So thank you.
I'm really glad
This was great. Thank you so much for all your insights. We will we'll wish you a fond farewell. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you, Shahir Daud, old friend, old podcast buddy. It was great to have you on the show for the perfect film.
Certainly was. We like to bring in our experts, and his expertise on Mr. Fincher was, and Mr. Koepp and several of the other
Yeah, it was nice to get a
participants was
screenwriter.
Wonderful. Now we have an announcement to make, don't we, Liam?
We do.
We have a
We
couple.
do. Yeah.
We have one to make, which is a little bit bittersweet. Mr.
The show's not
Billingham-
ending. The show's
No,
not ending.
The show's not ending.
Show's not ending.
Mr. Billingham is leaving.
I am leaving the great city of Los Angeles to go to another great city, Seattle, for familial and personal reasons. So we will no longer be living a few blocks from each other, which is...
I won't be able to make you my cups of honey tea.
Can
when
you
come
mail
over.
them to me like a few days before recording?
I have an excuse for not lending the DVDs now. So.
Now, finally, you're like, oh,
We did
thank
break
God.
thgoing through that barrier, though.
We did. No, we did. Yeah. So I will be. I'll be in a different city from Phil, but the show will continue remotely, and we're gonna add a little perk, which is hopefully you'll be able to watch us on video if that's what you're interested in. So we're gonna experiment with that.
So, as a result of both of these things, the brief announcement is that Die Hard on a Blank is taking a brief summer hiatus. Don't worry, we will be back, but as a sweetener, to sweeten the deal for our beloved.
Sweeten it. We know you're going to miss us.
Yeah, you're going to. How could you possibly cope without hearing us yak
David
about
Koepp?
movies?
How could you possibly David Koepp without hearing us?
What we're going to do to help sort of tide you over during the summer hiatus is we are going to put one of our episodes from our Patreon show, and we're going to give that to you for free here on this feed.
In a few weeks.
That is going to be Lethal Weapon 2, a film with a ton of Die Hard DNA, and it's kind of a cool crossover episode. And, if you just can't wait for us to come back from our hiatus, you can, of course, always subscribe to our show, patreon.com/48 hours of buddy movies, and service will continue uninterrupted on that show. We work really hard, but we just ran out of time to do Die Hard on a Blank and our Patreon, but the Patreon show will continue uninterrupted. We've got bangers galore. We've just recorded, what did we just do? We did, after Lethal Weapon 2, we've got Dark Angel,
Black Rain,
another 48 hours. We've got The Rookie coming in hot, and then we've got a whole host of amazing movies like Point Break and Thelma and Louise coming down the pike, as well as we've got the Beverly Hills Cop movies on there, and many, many others. To Live and Die in LA, RoboCop, Big Trouble in Little China.
A lot of back catalog. And
if you haven't already signed up, we encourage you to do so, and you can keep, we'll remain in your ears.
And we're even sweetening the deal for the month of August. So if you subscribe from the day this episode comes out until the end of August, you have 30 days to apply the discount code DHOAB Break 40. That's DHOAB BREAK 40, and you will get the first month for $3 instead of the usual $5. What a bargain to listen to the show and catch up on old episodes. So that's the discount code. You go to patreon.com, follow the link in the notes here, and use the code DHOAB Break 40 to get your first month for $3 instead of $5. And you can sample the entire back catalog. We'll include this in the notes. They'll be down below in the show. But we'll miss you guys, but sometimes you need a break, right?
It's Die Hard on a break.
Die Hard on a break. So there we go.
So there we go. So a little bit of business to take care of there, but yeah, please do consider joining the Patreon. We love doing that. We really love doing that show, and we can be a little bit more silly,
loosey-goosey.
Yeah, a little bit more. We're just like Jodie Foster's character. We're so buttoned up on the Die Hard on a Blank show. We really cut loose.
We take our glasses off on that feed. Yeah,
it gets weird on there.
Yeah,
and we've discussed some amazing movies. So please consider signing up at www.patreon.com/48 hours of buddy movies, and use that promo code. Now,
next time.
Review. Subscribe.
We're
thanks to
loosey-goosey
Tyson.
Tyson.
This is a little sampler. This is a little sampler of what you could get. This kind of mad podcasting. Next time on 48 Hours of Buddy Movies is another 48 hours, which was a really interesting episode to be. Which basically was just what the hell went wrong.
Yeah,
a really stylish kind of cool movie, but certainly not
marred
on the original.
marred by maybe too much ambition and what it was trying to do.
Some interesting behind the scenes stories as well about what happened with Paramount on that movie. So that was a really interesting episode. And then next time on this show will probably be that Lethal Weapon 2 drop as a bonus episode for you, and followed by, when we do come back from our hiatus, we will be discussing the one you've all been waiting for, Reign of Fire. It's Die Hard with dragons.
Yes, I
Bale,
started with dragons.
McConaughey, a young Gerard Butler.
Wait, Gerard Butler's in it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I just got so much. I almost just said Daddy got really excited. I just got really excited.
That's our other Patreon pod.
Visit
Daddy got excited.
Patreon.com/Daddy got excited.
when he saw Bridget Nielsen in Beverly Hills Cop 2.
Ooh, yeah, that's another thing. I get a little horny on that feed.
This is really going off the rails. We gotta go.
Next time with Lethal Weapon 2, and after that we'll be back with some fucking dragons. Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast from Philip Gothorn and Liam Billingham. Tyson Hubley makes our art. You can hear exclusive episodes of our Patreon show at patreon.com/48 hours of buddy movies. Rate, review, subscribe, and tell your action movie loving friends about the show. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.
Hi guys, it's Phil
And Liam.
from Die Hard on a Blank, and we're excited to talk to you about a brand new podcast we're launching called 48 Hours of Buddy Movies.
That's right, folks. 48-hour-long
approximately
episodes exploring 48 different buddy movies, beginning with the original classic that started it all, Walter Hill's 1982 masterpiece, 48 Hours, starring Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy.
And just like Die Hard on a Blank, our new show will explore the influence of 48 Hours on the action genre, one buddy movie at a time.
We'll be covering iconic franchises such as the Beverly Hills Cop movies, the Stakeout movies, the Bad Boys movies, classics of the genre like Running Scared,
Hyams Hive Rise Up,
Midnight Run, Red Heat, Tango and Cash, The Hard Way,
plus tough thrillers such as To Live and Die in LA, Black Rain, Point Break, Training Day, and The Way of the Gun.
as well as a few wild cards that you might not expect, such as RoboCop, Alien Nation, and, of course, Phil's favorite,
Harley Davidson and the Marlboro Man.
So if you're a fan of two buddies talking buddy movies,
Then 48 Hours of Buddy Movies is for you.
visit patreon.com/48 hours of buddy movies to subscribe for the price of 1 cup of coffee a month.
See you in the squad car.
Or walking to the squad car, mildly irritated that we've been paired off.
Wherever. That's patreon.com/48 hours of buddy movies to subscribe.